All right, get ready, because we're diving deep into Stoicism today. You send over some excerpts from The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. It seems like we're going on a mission to figure out how we can actually use obstacles to help us.
Exactly. We'll be pulling out the most useful ideas from the book and seeing how you can use these Stoic principles to deal with the challenges in your own life.
Okay, let's break this down. The book starts with some really compelling people from history who definitely didn't let obstacles stop them.
Right.
That story about John D. Rockefeller during the Panic of 1857 really caught my eye. Most people were freaking out, but Rockefeller saw a major opportunity. What do you think he was thinking?
Well, it's fascinating that Rockefeller really thrived in the middle of all that chaos. Instead of getting caught up in the fear and greed that everyone else was feeling, he stayed disciplined and carefully analyzed the market. It makes me think of Warren Buffett's famous advice to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. Rockefeller really embodied that principle, and it's no coincidence that this approach is what led to his huge success.
So it wasn't just luck. It sounds like it was his perspective, how he saw the situation that made the difference.
Exactly. Perceiving obstacles as opportunities is a skill that can be developed, and Rockefeller seemed to hone this skill during tough times. He trained himself to see the advantage when everyone else just saw disaster, and that's something we can all learn from.
This reminds me of that story in the book about Rockefeller staying so calm during that hostile cross-examination. It's like he was totally unflappable.
That story really shows how Rockefeller didn't just happen to be so calm and collected. He really worked at developing that mental toughness. It wasn't just some natural talent. He learned how to control his reactions and emotions through years of experience.
So how do we learn to see things more like Rockefeller? It's easy to get caught up in the stress when things get tough.
Well, the book gives another great example of someone who mastered staying composed under pressure. Ulysses S. Grant during the Civil War.
Yeah.
There's that incredible story where a horse right next to him was killed by an exploding shell and Grant didn't even flinch.
Wow. It's almost like these historical figures were in astronaut training. The book even mentions how astronauts practice managing panic.
Right?
Can you imagine losing it in space?
It's a great point. Whether you're an astronaut in a life or death situation or just dealing with everyday problems, being able to regulate your emotions is crucial.
Absolutely.
Think about John Glenn, the first American to orbit Earth. His heart rate stayed unbelievably steady the whole time he was up there.
That's amazing. So it sounds like staying calm leads to clearer thinking and better decisions, especially when things get intense.
Definitely.
But how do we even start training ourselves to be less reactive?
That's where objectivity comes in. The book introduces this idea through the legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi. He talked about the difference between the observing eye and the perceiving eye.
That's interesting. I'm curious to hear more about that. What exactly did Musashi mean by those terms?
Well, the observing eye just takes in what's actually there without any judgment or distortion. It's pure observation. The perceiving eye, though, is affected by our thoughts, expectations, and biases. So we see what we want to see or what we fear we'll see instead of what's really there.
That makes sense. It's so easy to jump to conclusions or let our feelings cloud our judgment of what's going on.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to learn to question our first impressions. The book stresses the importance of being able to separate our subjective opinions from objective facts. It's about stopping to ask yourself, what's actually happening here, separate from my own thoughts and feelings.
So training ourselves to see things from a more neutral, objective perspective, almost like taking a step back to get a clearer view.
Precisely. And once you can see things more objectively, you can then ask yourself another really important question. What parts of this situation can I actually control?
Okay.
The book has this great story about Tommy John, a baseball pitcher who played for an unbelievable 26 seasons.
Tommy John. Didn't he have that famous surgery named after him?
He did.
I know he bounced back from a career-ending injury.
Yes. Tommy John's story is an amazing example of focusing on what you can control. He faced a terrible injury that most people thought would end his career.
Right.
But he didn't give up. He explored every option. He even had this brand new experimental surgery.
And that was all after he was told he was too old to play, wasn't it?
It was.
His story makes me think about how so many successful businesses were started when the economy was bad.
That's a great connection. Difficult situations don't automatically mean you're going to fail. In fact, they can spark incredible innovation and resilience. The key is to focus on what you can influence, take things one step at a time, and keep asking yourself, what can I do to make the situation better?
So going from feeling sorry for yourself to figuring out what you can do about it.
Exactly.
That's a powerful way to look at things.
Yeah.
The book then shifts to Silicon Valley, talking about Steve Jobs and his famous reality distortion field.
Ah, Steve Jobs.
How does that connect to Stoicism?
Well, Steve Jobs definitely knew the power of thinking differently. His reality distortion field was basically his unshakable belief in his own vision,
Okay.
his ability to kind of bend reality to achieve what he wanted.
He seemed to just refuse to accept limitations, and somehow it worked. He achieved some incredible things.
Exactly. That unshakable belief, that refusal to just accept the way things were, that was key to his success. And this principle isn't just for tech geniuses.
Okay.
The book has this fascinating parallel from military history.
Yeah.
The German Blitzkrieg strategy during World War II.
Right. The Blitzkrieg was incredibly effective at first, but then General Eisenhower had this huge shift in perspective. He was able to see a weakness in the strategy itself.
Right.
That ultimately led to the Allied victories in battles like the Battle of the Bulge.
Eisenhower's ability to reframe the situation, to see the hidden opportunity within the obstacle, was a turning point in the war. Sometimes, all it takes is a shift in perspective to uncover those advantages and come up with new solutions.
I'm sensing a theme here. So thinking differently is important, but what about when we need to take action? The book moves from the battlefield to the sky with Amelia Earhart.
Okay.
She was so determined to become a great pilot, even when society was telling her that it wasn't a woman's place.
Amelia Earhart's story is all about taking action even when the conditions aren't perfect. She didn't just sit around and wait for the perfect opportunity to show up. She created it. She was willing to take risks and go against what people expected to chase her dream.
It's like that saying, leap and the net will appear, except she didn't even have a net. Her courage and drive remind me of Erwin Rommel, the desert fox from World War II. He was known for his bold, decisive actions.
Rommel was famous for always moving forward. He kept his opponents off balance by constantly attacking, even in really difficult environments. He understood that it was important to take the initiative.
He sounds like a perfect example of that always be moving philosophy.
Yes.
That's a great transition to the next part of the book, which focuses on persistence. The story about Ulysses S. Grant's Vicksburg campaign during the Civil War comes to mind. It took months of setbacks, failed attempts, and criticism, but Grant refused to give up.
Grant's persistence at Vicksburg is a classic example of how breakthroughs often come from just sticking with it. He didn't let setbacks or people who doubted him stop him. He kept adapting, experimenting, and eventually he found a way to reach his goal. We see the same pattern throughout history. Thomas Edison and all his attempts to create the light bulb.
And countless entrepreneurs and innovators who faced rejection and failure before they achieved their goals. It's inspiring to see how persistence can really pay off.
Absolutely. It brings us to the idea of iteration. This is really relevant to your entrepreneurial work. Remember the concept of the minimum viable product, the MVP, from Silicon Valley.
Yeah, that's the idea of launching a basic version of your product or service.
Right.
Then you test it out, get feedback, and improve it. It's all about accepting failure as part of the process.
Exactly. Silicon Valley startups really embrace this idea of iteration. They don't see failure as the opposite of success. They see it as a step towards success. It's like seeing yourself as a startup of one.
So even if things don't go perfectly right away, we should see those setbacks as chances to learn.
Exactly. It's about seeing failures as feedback that helps us get closer to our goals. Speaking of achieving goals, I know you're a big sports fan, so I was wondering if you've heard of Coach Nick Saban and his The Process philosophy.
I have. He's arguably the most successful college football coach of all time, but I admit I've never totally understood what the process really is.
Well, it's all about shifting your focus away from the outcome and on to the present moment. Saban says that the most important thing is doing each step as well as you can, regardless of the final result.
So instead of obsessing over the championship, he wants his players to focus on each practice, each play, each individual action.
Exactly. And by focusing on the process, you naturally feel less pressure, perform better, and set yourself up for success in the long run. It's about breaking down those overwhelming tasks into smaller steps and approaching each one with excellence.
It sounds like a recipe for success, no matter what you're trying to achieve. It's about doing your job and doing it right. And speaking of doing your job right, there's that story in the book about President Andrew Johnson. Even though he was president, he was really proud of his old career as a tailor.
That's right. Johnson thought that every job, even if it seems small or unimportant, should be done well.
Right.
He stressed doing every task with dedication, professionalism, and a commitment to excellence.
It's like that saying, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well.
Precisely. It's about developing a habit of excellence in everything you do.
Right.
And sometimes being excellent means we need to think outside the box to find unconventional approaches to get past obstacles. The book talks about the praise of the flank attack, using George Washington's military strategy during the American Revolution as an example. It's a fascinating case study.
It is. I always thought of Washington as a bold leader, always on the front lines.
Right.
But it turns out he was great at avoiding direct confrontation.
That's right. Washington knew he couldn't defeat the British in a head-to-head battle, so he used flanking maneuvers, strategic retreats, and other unusual tactics to wear down the enemy and take advantage of their weaknesses.
So he figured out how to win by not playing the enemy's game. The book says this approach is actually more common than we think. There's that amazing statistic from military historian B.H. Liddell Hart's research. It shows that only a tiny percentage of decisive victories in history were from direct attacks.
It's a mind-blowing statistic. It really makes you question what you thought you knew about how to achieve victory. It shows how important strategy, creativity, and finding those unexpected paths to success are.
It makes me think of the classic story of David and Goliath. David didn't try to beat Goliath at his own game. He found another way to win. It seems like sometimes the most effective approach is not a direct one.
Right.
And speaking of unconventional approaches, the next part of the book looks at the idea of using obstacles against themselves. It uses the powerful example of Gandhi's nonviolent resistance movement.
Gandhi's strategy was brilliant. He realized that the British Empire's strength could actually be used against them.
Interesting.
By peacefully resisting their unfair laws, he showed the world how brutal their regime was.
Okay.
And that's how he won over public opinion.
It's incredible how we use their own power against them. The book mentions other examples, too, like the Russian strategy against Napoleon and the Nazis, where they used the brutal winter weather to their advantage.
Exactly. Sometimes the way to overcome an obstacle lies within the obstacle itself.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already. It's really interesting to see how these Stoic principles have shown up in so many different situations. From ancient Greece to Silicon Valley, these ideas seem timeless.
They really are a testament to the lasting power of Stoicism. And we're not done yet. There's still so much more to explore, like how to channel your energy, embracing the idea of Amor Fati, and even meditating on your own mortality.
Wow, those are some intense concepts. My brain is already working overtime.
It's definitely a lot to take in, but I think you'll find these ideas both insightful and empowering. For now, maybe you can think about this question. What obstacle in your life might actually be an opportunity in disguise? We'll dig into that in our next session.
Okay, I've been thinking about that question you asked last time, about what obstacle in my life might actually be an opportunity in disguise. It's really made me think differently about some of the challenges I'm dealing with.
It really is incredible how just changing your perspective can change everything. And speaking of changing perspectives, the next part of the book focuses on channeling your energy. It uses tennis legend Arthur Ashe as an example. He was known for being so calm on the court, but his playing style was actually super dynamic and aggressive. How did those two things go together?
It is kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
It seems like a contradiction, but there's this story in the book about how Ashe used to carefully plan out his matches.
Right.
He even wrote out his own pep talks. It's like he was very deliberate about how he used his emotions and energy.
That's a great point. Ashe was really good at controlling his emotions, taking that inner intensity and channeling it into how he played. He understood that limits, whether they're things outside of us or struggles within us, can fuel our actions and push us towards excellence.
It reminds me of that quote, "Pressure can burst a pipe or make a diamond."
That's a good one.
Ashe definitely seemed to use pressure to his advantage. And speaking of pressure, the book also talks about how Barack Obama dealt with the Reverend Jeremiah Wright controversy during the 2008 presidential campaign. That was a major obstacle for him.
Absolutely. That was a crucial moment in Obama's campaign. Instead of avoiding the controversy, he used it as a chance to talk about the issue of race in America.
Yeah.
He turned a potentially disastrous situation into a way to connect with voters on a deeper level.
It's really amazing how he was able to take something so negative and turn it into something positive. Okay, so next is a concept that I'm still trying to fully understand. Amor Fati.
Yeah.
The idea of loving everything that happens, even the bad things, seems kind of strange.
I get it. Amor Fati is a Stoic concept that can be hard to grasp at first.
Right.
It's not just accepting what happens to you, though.
Okay.
It's about really embracing it,
Yeah.
finding meaning in it, even in the hard times.
The book tells that incredible story about Thomas Edison when his factory burned down. Years of work gone, millions of dollars lost, and yet he saw it as an opportunity to rebuild and start fresh.
Edison's response was the perfect example of Amor Fati.
Wow.
He didn't let the loss get him down. He focused on what he could create out of the ashes. It's a powerful example of choosing to see the good even when something terrible has happened.
It's like finding the silver lining, but on a whole other level.
Exactly. It's a powerful way to shift your thinking. Okay, moving on. The book talks about perseverance.
Okay.
It uses the epic story of Odysseus and his 10-year journey home after the Trojan War. That's a long commute.
I know. I can't even imagine going through a tiny part of what he went through.
Right.
His story really highlights the difference between persistence, which is about focused effort, and perseverance, which is more about long-term commitment.
Exactly. It's like playing the long game, you know? Knowing that the path to achieving big goals is rarely easy or straightforward. It's about enjoying the journey, even with all the ups and downs.
Okay, next is something that I think a lot of our listeners will connect with. Thinking about your own mortality. The book talks about Michel de Montaigne,
Great.
a French nobleman who had a near-death experience that really changed his outlook on life.
Montaigne's experience reminds us that thinking about death not in a morbid way, but just as a normal part of life, can actually be very freeing. It helps us appreciate the present moment, prioritize what really matters, and live more intentionally.
It's like that saying, live each day as if it were your last.
Exactly. It's about knowing that our time is limited and using that awareness to motivate us to take action and live a life with meaning.
Okay, so now that we've thought about our own mortality, it's time to build our inner citadel.
I love that analogy.
I do too. The book uses Theodore Roosevelt as an example. He overcame a lot of health problems as a kid to become, well, Theodore Roosevelt.
Roosevelt's story is a great example of how to build mental and physical resilience. He didn't let his physical limits define him. He actively worked to get stronger, both physically and mentally. That prepared him for the challenges that life would inevitably bring.
It's like he was building his own internal fortress.
Yeah.
Making himself ready for anything.
And speaking of being ready for anything, the next concept in the book is anticipation.
Okay.
Specifically, the importance of thinking negatively. This seems a little counterintuitive, right?
It might seem strange, but the book introduces the idea of a premortem.
A premortem.
It's basically a thought experiment where you imagine that your project or plan has failed.
Okay.
Then you work backward to try and figure out what could go wrong and how to fix it.
So it's like being your own devil's advocate.
Exactly. It's about trying to figure out all the things that could go wrong ahead of time so you're not caught off guard. It's about being prepared, not pessimistic.
It sounds like a great way to avoid bad surprises later on. Okay, so the last concept in our Stoicism whirlwind is the art of acquiescence.
The book uses the example of Thomas Jefferson. He was apparently a really bad public speaker.
It is a bit ironic, right?
It is. You'd think the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence would be a great speaker.
Well, Jefferson was a brilliant writer and thinker, but public speaking wasn't his thing.
Okay.
And instead of trying to fight that weakness, he just accepted it. He focused his energy on what he was good at, and the result was one of the most important documents ever written.
It's a good reminder that we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And sometimes the smartest thing to do is accept our limits and focus on what we excel at.
Absolutely. It's about playing the hand you're dealt and making the best of it.
Okay, so we've talked about all these Stoic principles and seen how they've been used in different situations. From ancient Greece to Silicon Valley, it seems like these ideas really stand the test of time.
It really shows how powerful Stoicism is. And we're not even done. There's still so much more to discover, like the idea of the obstacle becoming the way.
I like that. That sounds really interesting.
It is. It's really the core of Stoic philosophy.
Okay, I'm really interested to hear more about this whole obstacle becoming the way thing.
It is a powerful idea. It's really the foundation of Stoic philosophy.
Oh?
The book uses Marcus Aurelius as an example, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher. Late in his reign, he had to deal with a really big obstacle, a rebellion, led by one of his most trusted generals, Avidius Cassius.
Wow. That's intense. Betrayal and power struggles. This is also something right out of Shakespeare.
It does.
How did Aurelius deal with that? I can't imagine he just let it happen.
He didn't. But his response was unexpected. Instead of immediately fighting back with force, he saw the rebellion as a chance to prove his own virtue, his dedication to justice and reason, even when someone betrayed him.
So he used this incredibly difficult situation to show his character and his principles.
Exactly. And his approach had a huge impact. The rebellion fell apart not just because of military strength, but because of how strong Aurelius's leadership was. He turned the obstacle into proof of his own values.
That's a really powerful example of how the way we respond to a challenge can be even more important than the challenge itself.
Right.
It's not just about what happens to us. It's about how we decide to deal with it.
Exactly. And that's what the obstacle becoming the way is all about. The challenges we face, even the scary ones, can actually help us grow and learn and change for the better.
It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah, yeah. Or pressure makes diamonds. But with that Stoic perspective, it's about seeing obstacles not as things that stop us, but as steps on the way to becoming better versions of ourselves.
This makes me wonder, have there been any other people throughout history who used this Stoic idea of turning obstacles into opportunities?
Of course. The book has a whole list of people from different backgrounds and time periods who have been influenced by Stoicism,
Oh, wow.
from Frederick the Great and George Washington to even Bill Clinton.
That's quite a range. It's amazing how these ideas can be so meaningful to people from totally different fields and different times in history.
It really shows how powerful Stoicism is. It gives us a way to handle the challenges that come up in life, no matter who we are or what we do.
So where can we go to learn more about this Stoic wisdom? Any books you suggest for someone who wants to dig deeper?
The book actually suggests a bunch of books you can read, works from some of the most important Stoic philosophers.
Perfect. I'm always looking for new books to add to my list. What are some of the best ones?
They recommend starting with Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It's one of the most important texts in Stoic philosophy. It gives you insights into how to live a good and meaningful life. They specifically mention the Gregory Hayes translation because it's supposed to be easy to read and understand.
Okay, I'll check it out. What else is on the list?
It also has works by Epictetus and Seneca,
Okay.
and even some modern-day Stoics like Nassim Taleb and Tim Ferriss.
Wow, it's a great mix of classic and current perspectives. Seems like Stoicism is becoming really popular again these days, and for good reason. These principles make so much sense for the world we live in today.
They really do. The world can feel chaotic and unpredictable. Stoicism helps us to be resilient, to find inner peace, and to have a sense of purpose.
So as we're wrapping up our deep dive into The Obstacle is the Way, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
Remember this: the obstacle is the way. Welcome those challenges that life throws at you. Look for the good hidden inside them.
Right.
And the most important thing is to remember that you have more control over how you see things and how you react than you might think.
That's such a great message. We get to choose how we react to whatever happens.
Exactly. And when we understand that, we can handle those challenges with more resilience, more creativity, and maybe even some joy.
Well said. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive into the world of Stoicism. It's been a really eye-opening and encouraging conversation. And to our listener, we hope you keep exploring these ideas and see how they can change your life too. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep turning those obstacles into opportunities.